Welcome to Unpacking Autism with Reena Anand, the podcast where stories are shared, hearts are touched, and we grow together in empowerment to help our autistic children thrive. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in today. It's going to be a great one. We have got an incredible guest on today. It is Iqra Babar. She's a 22-year-old autistic Muslim woman with ADHD. She's a digital artist, currently working on a webcomic series that centers on neurodivergent characters, and she's also studying to be a teacher at university. As well as this, Iqra is an advocate for autism, neurodiversity, and disability, particularly in her ethnic and faith communities. She's passionate about debunking stigmatized viewpoints and opening up the conversation around neurodiversity in these spaces. Iqra also enjoys playing video games, reading comic books, anime and manga, superheroes and fantasy genre movies and books. She also loves delving into South Asian textiles and embroidery. And I'll share with you at the end where you can see her incredible work and commission any pieces you might be interested in too. They are superb. Welcome, Iqra. I am absolutely delighted that you've taken the time out, despite all of the things I mentioned, to have a chat with me today and for our listeners to hear from you and your story.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited and glad to be here.
Thank you so much. So I think if we just start right from the very beginning, I suppose, kind of you're 22. Tell us about your diagnosis, what prompted you to get your diagnosis and how old you were. Talk to us a bit about that.
So I got diagnosed when I was 17. To be more specific, it was literally the month before I turned 18. So it was at the end of 2017. And I got diagnosed after my brother did. So I've got a little brother who's 10 years old, and he got diagnosed, I think, when he was around, I think he was 3-4 years old at the time. And when he got diagnosed, that sort of prompted me to sort of think about, could I be autistic as well? Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have thought about it if I didn't, see my little brother get diagnosed as well. And then turns out that I am autistic and I do have ADHD on top of that, which honestly, it was really good and in a way relieving to find out about that. But at the same time, as much as there were like loads of questions that were answered about myself, there was also like a whole gateway of new questions that sort of opened up. Because back then, like I barely knew anything about autism and ADHD and just neurodiversity in general, which sort of to me is just it's very telling of how much it's talked about within our communities, within the South Asian community, and I guess also the Muslim community. So I barely knew anything about it back then. So it still is like a huge sort of learning experience, right? Because I learn from other autistic people. I learn from other neurodivergent people on their experiences and the things that they go through, and all of these like different traits and different like sensory experiences, and it all sort of it's all like added up, I think, over like the past almost 5 years, but like in such a good and educational way for me, because I've been able to learn so much about it. And when I look back at my childhood, it also answers like, a lot of questions as to like why I behaved the way I behaved, why I was the way I was as a kid. Because I was always called the weird kid as a child. Like in primary school and high school, I was always called like very strange or very weird. And not that there's anything wrong with that, because I don't believe in like normalcy or anything. But it's just funny looking back in her, because I'm like, wow, I really was an undiagnosed neurodivergent kid. So it's kind of funny looking back on it now. But yeah, no, honestly, my brother prompted like my own diagnosis, which I'm like very grateful for, because it has definitely sort of made me understand myself. I honestly don't think I would would know myself nearly as well as I do now if I
Yeah.
didn't have my diagnosis. So it's
Mm.
something that I am very, very grateful for.
Wow, that's so empowering. Just going back a bit to when you said when you were at school, are you able to kind of recall any um, sort of whether it's behaviors or think or that how you showed up, how you presented that now make you that that now you can see that's why they said it was weird.
Yeah, I mean, I know one thing that I did a lot as a child was copy other people's behaviors. And I would do that to sort of try and fit in with others.
Mm.
So, like, for instance, I remember I used to do this a lot, especially in like the upper years, so like years 4, 5, and 6. I would copy like the behaviors of the other girls in my class. I'd copy what they liked, I'd
Mm.
copy what they didn't like. So if they come up to school one day, they're like, "Oh, I like this cartoon," or I like this and that. I'd be like, "Oh my god, so do I!" In the hopes that I would fit in with them, but it
Yeah.
never worked. It never worked out for me, because they always used to think that, "Oh my god, Ikra's just copying us.
Mm.
She's just trying to do this to be cool, but
Mm.
like in a negative sort of connotation."
Yeah.
So it never worked out it never worked out for me. No matter how much I tried, whenever I tried to copy someone else's sort of behavior, it never worked out for me. And that's something I vividly sort of remember doing in primary school, was just sort of mimicking other people's behaviors and sort of try to mask my own,
Mm.
in the hopes that people will talk to me and they'll like me and this and that. But again, it never really worked. I also feel like it's funny because as a child I was both shy, but
Mm.
also like when I was around people I was comfortable with, like within the school setting, so like around like other children and stuff. I feel like I'd be like really sort of bubbly and hyper, which
Mm.
is a really funny combination. Like I'd be shy sometimes, but also I was always described by teachers as like bubbly or like very hyper and things,
Yeah.
which I think like for me correlates with my ADHD a lot.
Yeah.
Because I'll have like now if I have like a very sort of like hyperactive moment, it's not as like outward as it was when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Um, but I still do have like these very like energetic, like hyper-esque moments.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, I think that's probably one of the biggest things I can remember, is just that sort of want to be like others, which is unhealthy when I think about it now, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's a thing that loads of neurodivergent kids just go through, is that want to be like everyone else.
Yeah.
Because it can be difficult to, for some kids to accept you, essentially accept the way that you are,
Mm.
especially if they're not getting like support from like others, I don't know, like teachers or other guardians or whoever it is. um for me, I'm very grateful that I have a very accepting sort of family and local community around me, the people I surround myself with, that have had like sort of helped me embrace myself. But that's it's been such a long journey sort of doing that,
Yeah.
from childhood up until now. And it's something that I'm always going to be working on that.
Mm.
But I'm definitely a lot more comfortable with myself now than I ever was as a child, because I just remember like always saying, I want to be like this person, or I want to be like that
Yeah.
person. And it was never healthy for me.
Yeah.
um, but ever since finding out about my neurodivergency and learning about it, and having a family and a group of friends that really accept and understand me, has just been, for me, just so pivotal in sort of shaping me and my identity, and learning to love and accept myself,
Mm.
um, which is something I wish I knew as a child, but I'm happy that I know now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting to hear you talk about how you were presenting, because I think it really speaks to why sometimes it's harder to spot
Mm,
autism in girls. because of the
Yeah.
masking, and
Yeah.
outwardly you may have presented, from what you're saying, like maybe a little bit differently, but nothing that would make a teacher obviously think that you might be autistic.
Yeah. Well, actually, funnily enough, I think my mum told me about this, that they supposedly wrote, I think this was early on in primary school, on
Yeah.
my record that I had ADHD, but they
Wow.
never talked to my parents about it and they never talked to me about it. And then I think they took it off, which is really funny because I'm looking at myself now, I do have ADHD. So it's like, I don't know, that was really strange to me. But it does go to show that people do have this sort of view that it's very much a boys thing, or
Yeah.
they find it hard to believe that, a girl can be autistic or a girl
Yeah.
can have ADHD or whatever it is.
Mm.
I think that sort of just adds to that sort of
Mm.
notion is, people do find it hard to believe that a girl can be neurodivergent.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, the fact that a school could write that is a tad concerning. So it's good that they took it off, but at the same time, you think, wouldn't it have been more helpful to just have a conversation with your parents or something,
Yeah, yeah.
about what they thought, what they were seeing? But yeah,
Mm,
hopefully things have moved on a bit since then. Um, so, I mean, you talk very kind of very passionately about how it kind of it all fell together. It all kind of made sense after you got your diagnosis. So,
mm.
what's life like with being an autistic woman and having ADHD? I mean, have you now been able to identify things which can be challenging for you, and do you see benefits from seeing this in yourself?
Yeah, definitely. I think especially in like the recent sort of few years, I've definitely sort of been able to pick out what things work for me, what things I'm comfortable with, what things I'm not comfortable with. Um, for me, it's helpful in navigating like my day-to-day life. Like for instance, I don't like crowds.
Mm.
I'm not a huge fan of crowds like at all. Um, but there are exceptions where I will like be around crowds and things. So like I was at a Eid meal, I think a couple of weeks ago in
Hmm.
Trafalgar Square,
Yeah.
which was just absolutely packed. But I was with my family, so it
Mm.
made it more bearable because like my family knows that I don't like crowds. I'm not a big fan of them. But there are times where if I'm like around people who I trust or who if it's like family or friends, then I feel more comfortable being within
Mm.
crowds. But if I was like by myself, I'd absolutely hate it.
Yeah.
I would absolutely hate it. So I think knowing that has definitely sort of helped me, I guess, navigate around just around in society.
Mm.
Um, and ever since I've sort of been diagnosed, it's been a very sort of enlightening journey for me. Because I've sort of been able to start to identify what my traits are,
Mm.
and then different sort of coping mechanisms and strategies that can be implemented to help me,
Yeah.
and what the people around me can do to also help me, and to make things more accessible and accommodating to me,
Yeah.
which is it's so invaluable.
Hmm.
And it sounds like such a basic thing, to make things more accessible and accommodate to people. But I know that not everyone has that sort of same opportunity to have
Yeah.
that sort of be in an environment where things can be made accessible and accommodating to them, according
Yeah.
to whatever needs they might have, or whatever sensory sensitivities, or
Mhm.
things like that. I know that not everyone has that, so
Yeah.
I'm very grateful that I do, and that my parents and my family and my friends have been very supportive, ever since I got diagnosed, and very open-minded and very accommodating to me.
Yeah.
um, Life in general, I think, for me personally, like in terms of understanding myself, has been a lot better. a lot better, compared to like my life in school as a child. Because in high school, I was a very sort of quiet child. I didn't have many friends at all. And that sort of need
Mm.
to copy other people and be like others, I think really elevated in high school, which wasn't healthy like
Mm.
whatsoever.
Mm.
But I didn't know anything else at the time. I just wanted to be like others.
Yeah.
And ever since getting diagnosed, it's helped me learn who I am.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important to understand who you are,
Mm.
and love who you are in order to try and navigate through a society that honestly wasn't built for us.
Yes.
Um, because I have these conversations with my mum sometimes, and sort of like, the world that we live in just by default just does not accommodate to neurodivergent or disabled people, which
Yes.
is really sad when
Mm.
you think about it. um, because it really should be, and because it's not, it makes it like so much more difficult to navigate,
Mm.
the outside world.
Mm.
um, like for instance, I guess for like physically disabled people, having those like um, access needs like in like public areas and things, you don't get that everywhere.
Yeah.
Which it's never sat right with me. I would think that would be something that would be accessible everywhere, but it's not.
Yeah.
The reality is that it's not. For like autistic people, for neurodivergent people, there's things like sensory sensitivities,
Yeah.
like fluorescent lighting,
Yes.
loud noises, crowds, for
Yeah.
instance. It's all of these different things. They sort of add up, I guess, and
Yeah.
it can make navigating outside very
Yes.
difficult. And then you get, people who will sort of label that as like misbehavior,
Mm.
or they'll label that as them like complaining,
Mm.
or as them having a tantrum,
Yeah.
or just being uncooperative. And
Yeah.
that's the last thing we're doing. We're just having, like, sensory wise, we're having a lot of difficulties right now.
Yeah.
um and that needs to be understood more, because I feel like,
Mm.
especially like within like the South Asian community, there's this whole sort of, I guess, notion that they equate these sort of things to like complaining or like misbehavior.
Yeah.
And this is something I've heard like a lot. I've heard this a lot from like other people as well.
Yeah.
um just within the South Asian community,
Mm-mm.
is anything that people don't see it as like outwardly good behavior. They just associate it with bad behavior, and
Mm.
it's not. And then that's what sort of, I feel like that's what would make like autistic South Asian kids just shut down
Yeah.
or mask their difficulties to avoid that, which
Completely.
isn't, again, which isn't healthy
No.
in any shape or form, and it does make life for them a lot more difficult to navigate.
Mm.
So I'm very grateful that I have a family and I have friends who understand my sensory needs, and are always willing to accommodate for me and find ways to help me sort of manage them, or find ways to basically accommodate for my sensory
Yeah.
needs, or just any of my
Yeah.
um, my needs I might have as an autistic
Yeah.
person with
Yeah.
ADHD. But yeah, no, navigating life in general has been, on the whole, a lot better than what it used to be. But it's not perfect, in terms of the outside world, in terms of going outside and trying to have a pleasant experience with the public or whatever it may be, it's not perfect. Family wise, and in terms of my community, like my local community, family and friends, it's great, and I'm very grateful for that. But
Yeah.
in terms of the outside world, there's so much more that needs to be done to make life more accessible
Yeah.
and just accommodating to
Mm.
neurodivergent people,
Yeah.
because it in reality it isn't, and it's something that really needs to be worked on, I think.
Yeah. I'd love to hear from you a bit more about kind of what sorts of things your friends and family have done to help you feel more, to just be more comfortable in your surroundings. And also a bit more around what you think, more broadly, so your outside experience is not as positive as it is amongst the people that really love you, that know you really well. What else do we need to be doing to make, obviously we can't speak for all autistic and ADHD people, but I guess so the first part is, I suppose, what things do your friends and family do, and what would you like to see in the wider world that would make the world a bit easier for you to navigate?
Yeah. So one of the things that my mum does, which I'm so happy that she does this, is that so sometimes she'll make foods that I don't like. So like aloo gobi, for instance, I cannot stand the texture of aloo gobi. I cannot stand the texture of it. So I will not eat it. Like I just will not eat it. And my mum knows that. Like I will not go near aloo gobi or anything with gobi in it.
Yeah.
Um, so there will always be another option of food on the side, whether it's like a packet of of rice or noodles or something in the freezer. There's always something else to have,
Mm.
and she's never said you have to have it,
Yeah.
or you must eat this. Like that's never been the case. There's always an alternative for me, which
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for, because I don't know what it is about the texture,
Yeah.
but when I eat it, um, it's like my body just rejects it. Like I
Yeah.
just I can't swallow it.
Yeah.
Um, so I won't go near it. But there's always other food to have, which I'm very grateful for, because
Yeah.
I still get to eat, of course, even if it's not what my mum made for everyone else.
Yeah.
Um, I also don't like bananas. And I've never liked bananas since I was a kid. That's also another food which I can't stand because of the taste. It's very sour to me, and I can't stomach it. Um, and again, I'm never like told I have to have that as like part of my 5 a day or something.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so like in terms of food, like I'm never told that I have to eat this,
Mm.
or you have to eat that. It's very flexible in that
Mm.
sort of respect,
Yeah.
which I'm very happy with, and that's sort of like translated into my grandparents as well. So like when I go over to their house, there's always something else to eat. So again, if they made something that I didn't like, there's always something in the fridge, or there's always something in the freezer that I can also have, which feels to me very accommodating,
Yeah.
because I feel like because I think what a misconception that exists within the sort of South Asian community is that with food, for instance, if we don't eat it, I feel like a lot of people might be told, oh, you're being picky,
Mm.
or you're being fussy, or they'll take it personally
Yeah. Yeah.
and be like, why aren't you eating my food? Why aren't you eating what I've cooked? That took like this amount of hours and things. And
Yeah.
that can make autistic people feel really guilty for their sensory sensitivities,
Yes.
which they shouldn't. They should never feel like that, because it's not our fault that we
Yeah.
have these sensory sensitivities. So that's one thing that happens in my family, is that there's always an alternative to food. No matter what, there's always an alternative, which helps me.
Yeah.
When there's food that I can't, I just texture wise I can't eat. I know that there will be something in the fridge or in the freezer or just somewhere else in the kitchen. With my friends, when we like go out together and stuff, to like catch up and things, or like for food or for lunch or dinner, um, they always sort of try to make things accommodate for me. So like crowds, for instance, um, or if we were going somewhere I was not familiar with,
Mm.
so like a part of central London that I might not have gone to a lot, we always sort of like plan our trips accordingly. So like
Yeah.
I will always go with one of them to go to the venue, um, especially if I don't know where I'm going.
Mm.
Um, if we're going to like crowded places, I'll ask me, are you okay with like crowded places? Are you okay for us going here? Would you like to go this time? What suits you?
Yeah.
It's those sort of like small things, I
Yeah.
think, that
Yeah.
I'm that really matter to me.
Yes.
But it's also those small things that everyone should be implementing because they make a huge difference to how we um, essentially navigate
Mm.
through life.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's the small things that matter,
Yeah.
and that's just like that's just one of many things that
Yeah.
they sort of do to sort of accommodate for
Mm.
me. Sometimes if we like sometimes I'll like talk, we have a group chat on WhatsApp, and sometimes I'll just randomly just start talking about some of my traits, for instance. Um, just talking about, I don't like this and this and this, or I struggle with this sometimes. Um, and they're so understanding. They are so beyond understanding.
Yeah.
And I'm never made to feel guilty for the things that I struggle with, both my friends and my family. With my friends, for example, in the group chat, they're very understanding, so they'll never sort of make me feel like the struggles that I have that are
Mm.
not my fault, that
Mm-hmm.
then they're not my fault, and that it's okay to have these struggles
Yeah.
because we can then all work through them,
Yeah.
and try to find alternatives for you or find things that essentially work for you. Which again is something that I'm very grateful for, because growing up I didn't have many friends, so I've never sort of been used to having that feeling of having this really close group of friends
Yeah.
who truly accept you for you.
Yeah.
I never had that growing up in primary school or high school.
Yeah.
It was around the end of high school slash sixth form where I got to know my best friends now, where I got really close to them, and where they just accepted me completely after I got my diagnosis. I remember telling them about my diagnosis actually at it was in year 13 at the end of near the end of sixth form,
Yeah.
and I remember telling them, and they were fine, absolutely fine with it. Like it made no it it didn't matter if I was autistic,
Yeah.
and that I had ADHD, in the sense that I'm still, it's nothing to put someone down for. And
Yeah.
I never felt like, with my best friends, I never felt like, I was being judged for
Yeah.
being neurodivergent,
Yeah.
or that I was made to feel like, I was never made to feel like, the things that I struggle with are my fault. I was never made to feel isolated.
Yeah.
They never sort of made me feel left out.
Mm.
But I've had not so great experiences with other friends
Yeah.
who I'm no longer friends with.
Yeah.
Um, but with my best friends now, they, from the get-go, they've always been willing to listen to me
Yeah.
and understand me, which back then was a feeling I was not used to in terms of friends in school.
Yeah.
Um, because growing up, I didn't have that with
Mm.
friends in primary school and like the start of high school. So it was a very sort of new feeling to me,
Yeah.
um, to sort of have that innate acceptance, of which honestly it surprises me that not everyone gets that.
Yeah.
But then again, like within our community, this, the sort of viewpoints that people have about autism
Yeah.
and just neurodivergency in general, um, it's really sad, I think, to see just how they can be treated,
Yeah.
or how their struggles or their traits can like be mislabeled as like misbehavior,
Yeah.
or arrogancy, or just being disobedient, things like that. And it's unsurprising that because of that, South Asian neurodivergent children will want to mask their behaviors, and they won't want to show anyone,
Yeah.
their traits or what they struggle with, because if they're not being accepted or understood from the people close to them, then they're not going to show anyone else that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Um, so for me, I am very happy that I have friends and family who allow me to unmask, who allow me to essentially just be the rawest form of myself that I can be around them. Um, and
Yeah.
again, it's all those little things that just add up to that make such a huge difference to autistic people,
Mm.
and to me, for instance. It's made just the hugest differences. um, and that's just to name a few. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many other things that my friends and family do that I can't sort of think of right now, because my brain isn't letting me think of them. But that's just to touch the
Yeah.
surface. Yeah, that's just touching the surface on
Amazing.
what they accommodate for me.
Yeah. And I just really want to acknowledge you for that, because you've talked, in depth about kind of when you were younger and the difficulties of making friends, and just, I guess, knowing who you were under your skin. To be
Yeah.
then in a position where you received the diagnosis and you embraced it, to the point where you selected which of those friends you wanted to keep in your inner circle and which you were prepared to say, actually, this isn't working out. I mean, that's incredible, because yeah, to come from a place where you kind of always wanted that connection, it maybe could, I don't know, perhaps it could have been easier to just allow everyone in, but that would have been to your detriment. So I think I guess I just wanted to really say that that's really bold and brave and amazing, that you've basically surrounded yourself with the type of energy that you want to be associated with people who are on your path with you, and you're prepared to really kind of not let go, just to let go of those who aren't with you.
Yeah, yeah. I think I've gotten to a point where I just don't have the energy to entertain people who are not willing to understand me.
Mm,
Um, Considering that I've had to deal with that a lot in primary
yeah,
school and
yeah,
high school, I just do not have the energy for it anymore. So if I like meet a person and they're just genuinely not willing to understand me, like goodbye.
yeah.
Like just
Great.
genuinely just goodbye. I just it's just gotten to a point where I don't have the mental energy, I don't have the social
Yeah,
battery to entertain that.
yeah,
um so I just immediately, if I just sense that they will not hear me out, or they won't put the effort in to understand me, then I'm just not going to entertain
yeah,
this acquaintanceship, I guess.
yeah.
But also, funnily enough, I feel like when someone like shows me kindness and acceptance and stuff, I get very, I think, I feel like I become very trusting of them,
Yeah.
which is really ironic, I think. Because at one hand, I'm not going to put in the energy to people who don't want to understand me, but on the other hand, people who show me this sort of outward kindness innately, I feel like I just get very attached to that.
Yeah,
Maybe it's
yeah,
because as a kid, I didn't, from other people in my school, I didn't get that.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why I get very trusting very quickly
Yeah.
with like other people. But I just find that contrast really funny.
Mm.
But I'm sort of trying to tell myself, don't get too trusting too quickly, in the sense that, get to know the other person thoroughly
Yeah.
first.
Yeah.
Get to understand, um, who they are as a person.
Yeah.
If you both understand each other, if they're willing to understand you,
Yeah.
things like that. So I just find the contrast really funny.
Yeah.
On the one hand, I will not put energy into people who just will not want to put the same energy into me. But at the same time, if you show me any sort of kindness, I will get very trusting and attached to that.
Yes.
But I just think, in terms of like autistic traits, I just find that contrast really funny.
It's so interesting, isn't it? I mean, there was an old school of thought that autistic people couldn't be empathetic. And I think about my son and how expressive of love he is, and how many other autistic people I've met who, like, when you demonstrate that you're all in with with your friendship for them or your love for them, they will be the most committed person in that room. Like, they are all there, they will do anything for you. And so I completely and wholeheartedly reject that autistic people cannot be empathetic. If anything, I would say they're more committed, more empathetic than your average neurotypical person. So
Hmm.
it's really interesting to hear you say that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would definitely describe myself also as very empathetic. Because like when I'm talking to like my friends about things that they're dealing with, I feel like I can empathize a lot of the time with the things that they're going through, like emotionally.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I know that not every single autistic person is going to be as empathetic, which
Yeah.
isn't a bad thing. I feel like there's a sort of like picture painted that, if we're not this thing, or if we're not this and that, then we're bad people,
Yeah.
which is not true. I know some autistic people who struggle with empathy, but that doesn't make them
Yeah.
essentially bad people. But on the other hand, there are autistic people who are very, very empathetic. Like myself, I would definitely call myself a very empathetic person.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it's this sort of, I've heard that sort of stereotype myself,
Yeah.
we cannot be empathetic, which I would say for everyone isn't true.
Yeah.
Like, we can't sort of label an entire group of people with that sort of stigmatized viewpoint. Because I think that there are loads of autistic people who are very empathetic, but there might be some
Mm.
who genuinely struggle with it,
Yeah.
or they can't like outwardly show empathy. Because I think a lot of people sort of associate empathy with sort of an outward response.
Mm.
So they want to like actually see you be empathetic, or like for you physically showing, I don't know, some a sort of empathy towards the person. And I feel like some autistic people do struggle with that,
Yeah.
which can make them seem unempathetic,
Yeah.
which isn't, a lot of the time that's not the case. It might
Yeah.
just genuinely be the struggle of outwardly showing that empathy.
Yeah.
They might internally feel it a lot, but they can't. Maybe it's just some autistic people have struggle showing that
Yeah.
outwardly.
Yeah.
With me, for instance, I think I'm very outwardly empathetic. Like, if I find myself empathizing with someone, I'll just like say right off the bat, I am empathizing with you so much right now, and then I'll talk about why I'm empathizing with them. But again, I know that's not the same for every autistic person, but I definitely do agree that that's not something that everyone should be labeled, like every autistic person should be labeled as,
Yeah.
because it's not true. I think a
Yeah.
lot of us are very empathetic, um, just because we don't present it in the way that a neurotypical person or neuronormative person might want to see it as.
Yeah.
We're immediately labeled as unempathetic or rude or this and that,
Yeah.
which isn't true at all.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Completely agree. You have talked really passionately about the love and support you've received from your family and your local community. And I'd just love to unpack that a little bit as well, to just kind of pick your brains a bit about why ethnically diverse cultures sometimes struggle with accepting an autism diagnosis for their children or in their families. And, I've met many parents who feel like they're not only battling against the world, but they're battling against their own families and their communities to get their child accepted for the unique and beautiful being that they are. What are your thoughts on why we struggle with this?
Sorry. I think that within the community, just the topic itself is just not talked about. Because I mean, from what I've heard, especially, there's this sort of notion, I think, like within the South Asian community, for example, that mental health, neurodiversity, all of these things don't exist,
Mm.
or if they do, then they're immediately a bad thing, or that it's like this catastrophic sort of thing that people have very little knowledge about, but that's what it's categorized as. I think in a lot of ethnic communities, particularly the South Asian community, I think that's what it's innately labeled as, is this sort of catastrophic thing or something that's disastrous, and that in itself is very damaging. And because of that, a lot of people will grow up with that sort of notion that you know neurodiversity, disability, mental health, autism, all of these things are just innately bad, which isn't true, which is, it's not true whatsoever. But because a lot of people are brought up with that notion, they don't know any better. And because these conversations are not had within the community,
Yeah.
they don't understand it. And it's really sad. I think it's really sad that these conversations are just not had, because they're not, when they're not had, then those autistic children, like within the South Asia community, for instance, those neurodivergent or disabled disabled children will grow up only knowing how to mask their behaviors, or only knowing how to suppress themselves, essentially,
Mm.
which is unhealthy for any child
Yes.
to have to put themselves through that, because they're not surrounded by people who understand them.
Mm.
um and as a student teacher myself, it's something that where we learn about all the time, is this sort of our child's rights, and accepting children for who they are, learning about their needs and their traits in order to best accommodate for them.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of um, parents who don't have the knowledge about these things, or don't talk to actually autistic people or other neurodivergent people, they will not have that knowledge to support their children.
Yeah.
And something that I've seen a lot, ever since I got diagnosed, is a lot of parents follow the wrong information, because
Mm.
there is a lot of like for autism in particular,
Yeah.
there is a lot of misinformation out there. One of the most infamous ones is a group called Autism Speaks. And you can go out to any autistic person and they will tell you how much they despise that
Yeah.
group,
Yeah.
because so much of what they, well, no, almost everything that they do is very targeted towards hurting autistic people. Um, and a lot of us have spoken up about that,
Mm.
and that we do not support this organization who claim that they support us, and
Yeah.
they don't. You can look into the things that they do, and it's incredibly damaging
Yeah.
to autistic people. But I feel like when parents are met with the the notion that, their child might be autistic, this is one of the many things that they immediately run to, when they should be, essentially what they should be doing is, looking up actually autistic people. And there's like a whole movement on it on like Instagram and Twitter. It's the hashtag actually autistic, where you get to read things from actually autistic people.
Yes.
And to me, that should be the first step, is to find actually autistic people online. Look, because social media, most of us have access to social media. So that should honestly be the first step, is to go and look at the work that other actually autistic people have done and learn from those autistic people, rather than panicking and running to an organization such as that, which actively harms us and does us no good whatsoever. I think the panic that parents have comes from this whole sort of misunderstanding that they have about the topic. I think if they were more informed about what autism actually is, what neurodiversity is, what disability is, things like that, I think they would be a lot more innately accepting. But because, especially in ethnic communities, because these conversations are just simply not had, there is this panic about their child, which stems from societal views on us. I mean, dating back to like years ago, people have never had positive perceptions of us, or they've had extremely like harmful and just straight up grotesque viewpoints on us. And it's so damaging, because that sort of stuff still carries on today, in terms of all of these like negative perceptions of us. And people will believe that. People will believe anything that they hear without actually doing research themselves or finding it out for themselves. And I think that's something very prevalent within like the South Asian community. They'll just go with whatever they're told. Like they just will not go and do the research themselves, which is so damaging, because you don't know what sort of harmful notions you're essentially carrying forward. You don't know what sort of toxic viewpoints you are going to be embedding into your children or into your family. And I just think it's so important to actually listen to autistic people in order to understand what it is, so that parents don't have that panic. Because I've always said that, and I'm a huge believer that you cannot understand autism without speaking to autistic people. Like you simply can't. Like no professional is going to know as much as the autistic person, because we are the autistic person. We know what our traits are, we know what life is like for us. At the forefront, we know autism, because we are autistic people. So I've always said that the best way to learn about it is from the autistic people. There's also like a movement online, which I think the hashtag is nothing about us without us, which is sort of calling out like the media representation of us. There's like various shows that try to portray autistic characters, but one, they're almost never ethnically diverse, and two, they're always portrayed by a non-autistic actor, which I think speaks for itself how bad that it essentially is. Because you cannot mimic what an autistic person goes through. Why don't you just hire an actual autistic person to play an autistic role? It's just sort of never added up to me, why you just wouldn't hire an autistic person, to play a role with their identity. Because I feel like when you hire like non-autistic people to play an autistic role, it's like a hotbed for stereotypes. Or it's like it's it's like an open gateway to enforcing these sort of stigmatized viewpoints and things. Like something that I see like a lot of parents associate autistic kids with is savant syndrome.
Yes.
And I know that there's a show, I think it's called The Good Doctor, that portrays an autistic man played by a non-autistic actor who also has savant syndrome. And savant syndrome is essentially where I think it's when a person like really excels in like a particular field.
Yeah.
So in The Good Doctor, I think his name is Sean Murphy is the character. He's autistic and he's also got savant syndrome. So he's like extremely clever in science. Like he's, you know, he's is so advanced, he's so intellectually smart. But that in itself is such a stereotype.
Really is.
Because then people will assume autistic people are also savant. No, we're not. But that doesn't make us any less. And I think that when parents realize that, you know, at first, there's almost this disappointment, and there shouldn't be. There should not be that disappointment because, you know, just because we don't excel in a specific subject, or, you know, just because we're not savant, we're not less. And I think a lot of people and I think parents do associate things like that as less. You know, that if we're not this, or if we're not excelling in that we're less. And that's such a, you know, to say that to a child is very damaging to them and their self-esteem, because it's almost telling them, because you can't do this or that, or because you have difficulties with this, you are less. And to, you know, to say that to a child is just, you don't know what kind of impact that can have on the child, especially if they're sensitive to that kind of stuff. So I think the bottom line is that with parents, you know, rather than panicking and, you know, running to all of this sort of false information that's online, I think they really need to take the time to research about autism from actually autistic people. And I think that should be the first and foremost step. Because again, we've all got access to social media, we've all got access to the internet. And the first thing we should be doing is, okay, my child might potentially be autistic. Maybe I should learn about autism from actually autistic people, because that's the best way you're going to get an insight on autism is talking to those actually autistic people. So I would definitely say that should be the absolute first step that you should be doing. And just not panic. I don't know, I've never understood the sort of panic, because I think this sort of like panic motion that people have comes from this stigmatized, I guess, fear. Because people don't talk about it, they develop this fear of it. And that should never be the case, because that sort of then indicates that you're viewing it as a very negative thing, or that you're viewing it as, again, something disastrous. But that's just very telling of how little you know about it. And that also, you know, goes to show how much it needs to be talked about within especially ethnic communities, because there are loads of notions that still exist that are very unhealthy and essentially toxic to autistic and neurodivergent children. So I think that I've never sort of understood the panic that people may have. I think rather than panicking, it should, you know, it shouldn't be something that you should be afraid of. It should be something that you should be willing to understand about. You know, because you know, people you know, no one's the same, right? Like no, like in terms of like human beings, not all of us are the same, and not all of us are neurotypical. You know, so having that sort of expectation for everyone can be unhealthy when you find out that your child might be autistic. So I feel like parents should have that mindset that, okay, if my child is potentially autistic or they are neurodivergent, I'm not going to panic. I'm going to first, you know, reach out to actually autistic people, find out from them what it's like for them, what sort of strategies and accommodations they have that helps them, and then what I can do for my child,
Mm.
rather than instantly panicking, going, oh no, my child's autistic, that's not a good thing,
Yeah.
and then just going into this frenzy of
Yeah.
trying to essentially suppress their traits and trying to make them fit into this sort of neurotypical bracket,
Yeah.
which again is so unhealthy for an autistic child, to sort of
Yeah.
force them into this bracket where they don't belong in.
Yeah.
Rather, they need an environment that's accepting of them and is willing to help them with what they have difficulties with.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no,
Yeah.
honestly, I just think the first step, I think parents just need to reach out to autistic
Yeah.
people and
Yeah.
learn from them. Honestly, just
Yeah.
learn from them.
Yeah. And I think, I agree with all of that. And I think us, as a community, as the South Asian community, generally speaking, in my experience, can be it can be a place of comfort and unity. So, if something happens, like if someone passes away or someone's born, we get together, we support each other, we turn up with food, we do what we need to. And yet when we have, in my experience, when, you have a child with an autism diagnosis, all of a sudden people are very uncomfortable. And
Yeah,
I think one of the things I did with Evie was, when I embraced it, was being very open about his autism and what he needed from the people around him and from his community, so that he was welcomed as he is, not with sympathy, but welcomed for the being that he is. And I think when we try to hide it, we are just trying to keep, maintain this mask that everything's fine, my child is just like everyone else's child. And
yeah,
what we need to get on board with the fact that our children are different, uniquely different and beautiful. And then when we outwardly project that confidence and we embrace the diagnosis, it gives the permission to other people to do the same. We will only
yeah,
normalize it when we all are open about it, rather than trying
yeah,
to pretend, like dealing with it only within the confines of our house and pretending outwardly that, or in some cases, I guess with some families, they've just cut themselves off from their communities and their places of worship and faith, which is, I find, really sad, because just
yeah.
because you're autistic, that doesn't mean that these things should not be accessible to you. And on that
Mm.
note, do you feel like your faith and your places of worship, do you feel that they're accessible to you?
It's, I feel like, so the Islam itself, so I'm a Muslim, and to me, Islam itself, like the religion itself, you know, talks so much about making Islam accessible and making it accommodating for other people so that they don't turn away and that they don't, reject faith. But looking at, the community in general, I think there is a lot to be done,
Yeah.
because I've talked about this before. I've written a blog post about it on my website. I was talking about how the religion itself is very accommodating, but the people don't reflect that.
Yeah.
So, for instance, one thing that I feel like masjids, for instance, could really implement for neurodivergent people is having a quiet room.
Yes.
I just the idea of a quiet room, I think would be so incredibly beneficial for autistic people, for other
Yeah.
neurodivergent people, for disabled people, and for honestly for anyone, but especially like those groups. It would be
Yeah.
so beneficial to just have a room
Yeah.
to just breathe and recollect yourself, because masjids can get very busy.
Yeah.
And for someone like me, who doesn't innately like crowds,
Yeah.
having a quiet room to just breathe for a few minutes, to just recollect myself, to just be alone for a while,
Yeah.
should be something that's made accessible for autistic Muslims.
Yes.
And that's just something I like hardcore stand by, is that masjid should have a quiet room so that we can go and essentially just decompress, so
Yeah.
that we can still access our faith, within our own accordances, within, I guess, boundaries that suit us,
Yeah.
so that, because a lot of us can't deal with crowds, and that's okay. we just need to have the accommodations that sort of work around that. So I think a quiet room
Yeah.
would just honestly just be such a
Yeah.
brilliant thing to implement.
Yeah.
And it would help so many people to just essentially just calm down and to just recollect themselves from the busyness of a masjid.
Yeah.
But yeah, now I've always said that the community is what needs to be worked on. But
Yeah.
the religion itself talks so much about disability, it talks so much about neurodiversity, and it talks so much about accommodation. And it's just ironic to me that a lot of the time it's the community that will struggle to reflect that.
Yeah.
But the religion itself, Islam itself, it's what's made me sort of fall in love with the religion all over again, is finding out about, the different ways that God talks about
Yeah.
accommodating for us and making things easy for us and treating others with kindness. There's honestly so much like social justice and so much equality that Islam is centered around,
Yes.
but the people need to reflect that as well. So I think that Islam itself is a huge advocate for disabled people and
Yeah.
for neurodivergent people. I just think that the communities need to reflect that.
Yeah.
So, like a quiet room, for instance,
Yeah.
would just be so beneficial
Yeah.
for disabled and neurodivergent people, and it would help them access their faith in a way that doesn't isolate them,
Yeah.
so that they can still go to a masjid and have a room where they can just be by themselves
Yeah.
and not be judged for it.
Yeah.
It's the things like that where I think the community needs to put the effort into making it more accessible for us, rather than dismissing, I
Mm.
guess, the
Mm.
things that we struggle with. Um, I know that there is a initiative going around about translating the Quran into sign language, which is, that's huge. In terms of disability advocacy and for disability rights,
Yeah.
that's a huge step in the right direction. But there needs to be more of that, and that
Yeah.
needs to be, I think, localized in like local mosques as well. Is having that accessible, not just in like, really huge sort of like national mosques, but like in local mosques as well,
Yeah.
having that accessible to everybody.
Yeah.
It's things like that. I think it needs to be much, much more prevalent, and
Yeah.
so that it's not something where we have to travel ages away for, but it's within a few minutes distance from us, because that's what access is making
Exactly.
things easier for us to essentially access, right?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
making things easier for us to
Yes.
essentially have.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of many things that it is working towards that need of accessibility. And again, things like quiet rooms in the mosque. And again, not just like the big sort of national mosques, but
Yeah.
local mosques as well.
Yeah.
Just having something like that would just be incredibly beneficial. I know for myself, especially, I would love to have something like that, just to go in a room and just be by myself for a few minutes. And
Yeah.
then when I'm ready, I could come out and
Yeah.
then, do whatever I need to do. It's just
Yeah.
things like that. I think the
Yeah.
community needs to respond better to what the
Yeah.
religion itself is saying.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's really made me think as well. I used to go to the temple a lot, but after having Evie, I didn't feel it was accessible to me for all the reasons you've
Mm,
articulated. And it's such a simple thing to implement.
yeah,
These are big
yeah,
buildings. There'll be a room, you know,
yeah,
and it'll be and it just needs to be okay to see people going in there, spending as long as they need, and coming out when they want.
yeah,
It's so much less human effort than trying to translate an entire religious text into sign language, right? Which
mm,
is equally important, but it's just, I think it's people like you that will drive this positive change, and listening to actually autistic people share how they need places of worship to be accessible, that hopefully will
yeah.
bring about this sort of change. So I'm really grateful for you for sharing all that. So just
Mm.
as we close, what would be the last thing what would you really want to any autism parent listening in today to this podcast, what would you like them to take away?
Listen to your child. Like 100% listen to what your child is asking from you. I know that within autism, you have speaking autistic children, and you have non-speaking autistic children, regardless of how they communicate with you, whether it's through verbally speaking, whether it's through AAC, so alternative forms of communication. Just listen to them. Listen to what they want, listen to what they need, listen to what they're struggling with, because you're not going to understand what they need if you don't have that line of communication with your child. On top of that, listen to actually autistic people. In order to actually understand what autism is, listen to autistic people, center their voices, center autistic voices, over whatever professional that you may be looking to get advice from. Center those autistic voices first. And that's something I think so many people need to understand, is that you cannot have a concrete understanding of autism without listening to autistic people. So 100% listen to your child. Listen to what they are asking from you, what sort of needs that they need accommodating to. Don't dismiss them of them, or don't try to fit them into this sort of neurotypical bracket that they simply do not fit into. Rather, make an environment where they feel comfortable being their autistic self in, and being in an environment where they can flourish as an autistic person. And just simply having that line of communication with them, so that they feel like you are listening to them, and that you as a parent are listening to autistic voices, because that's the only way you're going to understand autism properly, is listening to those autistic voices.
Amazing. And where can anyone who wants to find out more about you and your drawings, where can people find you?
So I'm mostly active on Instagram. My handle is at Iqra Draws. It's the same handle on Twitter as well. And I also got a website where I occasionally write blog posts and stuff, iqradraws.co.uk. But you'll mostly find me on Instagram most of the time.
Thank you. Iqra, you have been incredible. I think it's been such an empowering discussion. I cannot see how anyone could listen to you speak and not see the beauty and majesty of who you are becoming, and the privilege that the children you are going to teach in the future will have of you being a teacher is just incredible. So thank you so much for giving me your time today to share your thoughts and perspectives on how we can be more inclusive. I mean, I can't even summarize that we've covered like so much stuff. It's been incredible, absolutely brilliant. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Unpacking Autism with Reena Anand. Podcast artwork by Creative Stripes, editing by Adam Jones Lloyd, and music by autistic musician Paul McGowan.